Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly, and on this episode I'm joined by Peter Stitcher of Ascent Fly Fishing. Ascent's claim to fame is its use of science to customize fly selection not just by watershed, but by time of year. More interesting, though, is Ascent's focus on community in everything it does, whether it's growing the sport or supporting its team members. Peter's generously offering Articulate Fly listeners 10% off their next order. Simply visit www.ascentflyfishing.com and use the code Articulate10, all caps, all one word, number 10 at checkout. But before we move on to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend, subscribe in the podcatcher of your choice, and leave us a review. It would really help us out. And a shout out to this episode's sponsor. This episode's brought to you by our friends at the Bristol Bay Defense Fund. With the decision on the Pebble Mine's most critical federal permit application due later this year, 2020 is an important turning point in this long-running saga. To help this diverse coalition continue its efforts to protect one of the world's largest wild salmon runs and all of its economic, cultural, and ecological benefits, please visit www.bristolbaydefensefund.com and donate today. Now, on to our interview. Well, Peter, welcome to the Articulate Fly.
Thank you for having me, Marvin. I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation, and we have a tradition on the Articulate Fly. I always ask all of my guests to share their earliest fishing memory.
Yeah, I recently found a VHS tape, and I was probably 4 years old, wearing some Ocean Pacific shorts in just north of Knoxville, Tennessee, fishing a little pond called the Cross-Eyed Cricket, and it was a pay-to-fish spot, and we had cane poles and corn, and you could have walked across that pond. There was so many trout in there, but it was my mom and me and these painfully short shorts, and we were just pulling trout out. You could pull them out with a naked hook, but that's where it all started.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's my first fishing experience, but I had some pretty similar experiences on trout farms when I was a kid in Virginia, for sure. When did you get lured to the dark side of fly fishing?
I was a pretty rambunctious kid and didn't pay a lot of attention in school. So I was able to have kind of a mentor and to calm me down, to kind of persuade me to do my work. He brought in a fly tying vise. And I was always kind of a dirt nerd and playing in the swamps and in the creeks back home in Nebraska. And he started showing me the stuff that I was pulling out of the creek. He started tying flies that looked like it fascinated me and gave me some more impetus to be out there in the mud. So I started tying flies in fifth grade, and then I was already a big spin fisherman at that point, but started using my flies and the feeling of catching a fish on something you tied to outsmart that fish, matching the foods that they were actually eating. It's just something clicked inside of me. So it was ripe young age, fifth grade, probably about 11 years old.
That's great. Do you remember the first vise you had and the first fly you tied on it?
Yeah, it was probably some little $5 vise, just something that's clamps to the edge of the table and mashes the hook flat. But yeah, I still actually have some of the first flies that I tied, and they were the ugliest, biggest elk hair caddis you could imagine. And all the backs of the hairs are trimmed, trying to make them the right size, because I probably used twice the length of hair I needed at that time, but I'm absolutely sure I still have those in one of my earliest fly boxes.
Well, that's great. So we kind of move towards today. Who are some of the folks that have mentored you on your fly fishing journey?
Probably the biggest influence in my fishing journey and love of the outdoors was my mom. And as this passion kind of awoke in me to fish and then fly fish, I'd be going through the manuals from the Parks and Wildlife and seeing another pond or lake or creek that I wanted to fish. And she'd get up at 4 a.m. to drive, an hour and a half with me to get me to that pond, and we'd fish together. So she wasn't a big fly fisher. She's gone with me some in later years, but she was the one that really helped to foster that passion and acknowledge that in me. And then the gentleman that really got me into fly fishing was kind of a distant relative who was an Afrikaner from South Africa. And he was one who helped me to take the flies off of the spinning rod and bubble and put it onto a fly rod. And we started by casting in the pool in the backyard and then right up to Estes Park and starting to fish some of those waters together. And my first day out with the fly rod, caught 16 fish in the first morning. I'm like, yeah, this is it for me.
Yeah, that'll definitely do it to you. And if we kind of move forward a little bit more to kind of, I guess, the recent past, can you share with us the impetus for starting Ascent?
Yeah, so Ascent Fly Fishing, we're a pretty different shop in a lot of ways, but the idea of Ascent things differently. Rising up like a fish rising to take a fly, ascending through the water. We value some different things and really go about the sport and empowering people in different ways. But it was probably, almost 8 years ago now that 7.5, my daughter, she was a baby at the time, had some kidney failure, and I was working full time as a biologist at the time. Wondering how in the world am I going to pay for, a potential kidney transplant on a biologist's salary and horrible insurance. And so we started tying flies, and people would ask me, what's working here? Can you help build me a box? And as a biologist, I could say, I actually was on the team that did the restoration work on that section of river, and I did all the entomological studies. I saw what bugs live there, and so not only are these the bugs that are in that river at this time of year, this is what those bugs look like. This is their life cycle. And so here, let me tie you these flies. And people would go out and they would catch more fish than all the guides and their fishing buddies with that selection. Like, you were spot on. So I started doing that to pay for my daughter's kidney surgery. And fortunately, she is a whole and has both kidneys. But in that time, I saw that, my unique kind of perspective as a biologist was really answering that core question: what are they biting on? And I was uniquely positioned to do that. And so I started on a weekend. We started opening up the garage and letting people come over and buy flies for their unique waters. And that's my passion is connecting people with the river.
Gotcha. And so how has that, that's the beginning. How has that approach kind of broadened out as Ascent has matured?
Right. So we're in the process of getting pretty techie about it now. So in the past, it's been a pretty manual process where I'd have clients from, out in your neck of the woods, North Carolina, Virginia. They would, get on the website and tell me when and where they're fishing out there, or clients from New York or California. And we would kind of manually go through these databases of insects. We have a surplus of about 600,000 flies now in the shop, and we build these selections of bugs specific to the life cycles and the families of insects in the waters our clients fish when they fish them. So we take the guesswork out. But, we are in the process of automating this now to utilize computer learning, to utilize algorithms that as our clients punch in their information, as they provide feedback, our models will start to learn, will start to mature. You and I were talking before the podcast started about how warm it's been in North Carolina and Virginia and how it's accelerated the hatches. What we're working on now is going to be able to take those variables, those weird years where it's a little warmer, a little colder, a little wetter, a little snowier, and it's going to tell us these are the flies, these are the life cycles, this is what's going to be working on your water. So it's science, and but when it comes to our clients, they're not getting a bunch of Latin and ones and zeros from a computer. They're getting flies that are organized by hatch and life cycle for where they're fishing, and they hit the river with confidence.
Got it. And do you have a particular angler in mind when you build the company out and all the processes?
You know what? It's interesting. Between our classes, between our selections, I have anglers that have been on the water for 50 years, and they are appreciating and able to go deeper. We meet them where they're at. So they can be a mature, very seasoned angler. And, again, every day I have people come into the shop. It's their first time, and they might be coming in with their grandpa's tackle box and their spinning rod, and they are welcome. And we'll sell them, 6 flies, and we will drop a pin on Google Maps, and I'll tie on their first, flies onto their spinning rod, and I'll set their indicators and weights, and And I encourage them, after you fish this spot and you lose these flies, come back and we'll get you on another spot and a few more flies. So it really spreads the gamut. Lifelong anglers, spin fishermen, men, women. I mean, the whole spectrum, every orientation, like they're all welcome here.
Yeah, that's really great. And I thought about this when I was preparing for the interview. You have this science-driven approach, and you're very methodical about the bugs you give people and the progression to fish them. Where do you sort of fall on that spectrum of matching the hatch versus having a more generic fly with a good presentation?
So we take a couple things into consideration in selecting the flies. I'm looking at the skill level of the angler, and also kind of their style of angling. So for skill level, if it's a seasoned angler that has 8 fly boxes full of flies, they might consider themselves an advanced angler, and I might want to take like a 100-foot view of the river for them. They have a lot of that general stuff that can scratch a lot of itches, match a lot of bugs, but I want to give them the precision, that kind of that knife blade, really those specific life cycles and hatches. So I'm going to go close, and I'm going to be really tight to matching specific hatches and life cycles for them. For a younger angler or someone who's just getting their feet wet, I mean, I don't want them to have to spend $40, let alone $500 to get every fly that they think they might need. So I am going to tend a little bit more towards those generalist patterns, those pheasant tails, those hare's ears, the zebra midges, the parachute Adams and elk-hair caddis, those specific patterns that within a couple of sizes of that pattern, you can match 10 or 20 different hatches across a larger region, across a longer season. And so I'm really trying to give them the most value. Just what's the minimum I can give them without breaking the bank to give them success on the water. As far as approach goes, if they're fishing traditional kind of dries and droppers and indicator rigs, I'm a very hatch specific and general flies. When it comes to the people doing check nymphing or Euro nymphing, matching the hatch kind of goes by the wayside a little bit, and it's more about weight and getting your flies into the correct zone in the river. So I will accommodate that with the flies I provide for people doing Euro nymphing.
Got it. And kind of a related follow-up, do you find that your approach is universally applicable, or do you think it's better suited to more technical fisheries like tailwaters and spring creeks?
It is absolutely universally applicable. So, in the questions, as people come to our website and they say, they choose from among our biologist pack selections, they choose a budget, they tell us about their skill level. And then one of the questions we're going to ask is, what types of waters do you want us to match to? So they can specify this selection is going to be for lakes and ponds. And there's a whole kind of family of insects that specialize and live in those lakes and ponds in their region. Or they want a tailwater box or a freestone river box. So we can customize it to the water type. And again, we have the data for it. We have the flies for it. And I think we do it better than anyone else.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, you've done plenty of interviews in the past. And, one of the interesting things is, I find that most of your approaches are very process driven. So you have a very specific process for organizing your fly box. And you've got a great video, I think, on your site and a DVD you sell to help folks with that. And then you also have these great acronyms, for example, PAWS, to help people figure out kind of what bugs to start with and how to fish throughout the day, as well as match. Where does your affinity for process come from?
So there is so much information. The learning curve is so large, it can seem insurmountable. And my goal is to break the dependence on the fly shop, to break the dependence on the guides, and to teach a man or a woman to fish so that they can enjoy and kind of draw life from the water for a lifetime, in and of themselves on the water. And if they feel like they have to buy the next 6 books from the coolest authors in the space or learn the Latin names, it's just their head's going to get so full. It's the joy gets lost in the details. And I want people to know that being a successful angler and being able to go out and tap into what nature's doing and interact with the trout where they're at and have a great day on the water, it's really simple. I want to simplify it. And so by creating just a little phrase like pause before you match, that PAUSE stands for the 5 places that, if they can remember PAUSE, they can think this is where bugs that the fish are eating are going to be found today. And so they can do that quickly. And then they're going to have that observation in front of them. They say, all right, the next thing I have to do is time to match, right? Time to choose my flies. I'm going to prioritize these 5 things out of what I just saw. And these flies are going to be the most likely ones that the fish are going to be eating. So again, I don't want to teach Latin. I've never met a trout that speaks Latin. Generally, people at parties aren't impressed if you do either. So let's keep it simple. Let's keep it focused on empowering people for success. And so that's what these processes are for, to empower people.
Got it. And you employ those in so many different ways, whether it's product design, meetups, classes, digital outreach. Can you share a little bit more about all of the things you've got going on at Ascent Fly Fishing to kind of help get those anglers up that learning curve as quickly as possible?
Absolutely. Yeah, knowledge is power. So I don't know how long I'm going to be able to continue to do this, but on my business card on the website, that number rings through to my mobile. So, I often am answering calls at 6 in the morning. The other call from the East Coast the other day came in before 5 and I took it. So I'm accessible to answer questions without a hard sell. There's no string attached that they have to come and buy flies. On the website, ascentflyfishing.com, there is a wealth of information. Just people can look up the flies by hatch, by life cycle. They can look up any fly in their fly box just by typing in the name. And I state, this is the hatch species and life cycles that this belongs to. This is when you're going to fish it. So start building those connections between the water and their fly boxes. We have a whole section called Learn to Fly Fish, where there's over 7 years worth of articles. So for every week, I write an article that takes some aspect of the science of fly fishing and how do you apply that on the water. That's all just a wealth of information that's free and available, but also the podcast we've been on, our YouTube videos. It's all accessible there. And knowledge is power. So we're here to help reduce that learning curve. And then we do classes. I think you and I first met at the Virginia Wine and Fly Fishing Festival, and we saw each other again at the Fly Fishing Show in Edison, New Jersey this year. So I have an opportunity, feel blessed to be able to go and speak at a lot of these fly fishing shows around the U.S. and fly fishing clubs around the U.S. And it's just a great opportunity to help make simple and make smooth and bring some clarity to these perennial questions of the angler. And then also I get to learn from these people in different regions and how they're fishing, and it sharpens me as well.
Yeah, that's really neat. And, I think there's probably more to it than just teaching people to fish. What are you trying to accomplish with your educational outreach in addition to helping anglers become more competent and confident on the water?
I think there is fly fishing has kind of a stodgy, kind of secretive, maybe not very welcoming at times persona. And this will be seen on Instagram and Facebook as, maybe some new angler holding up a fish and they get lambasted in the comments about like, you're squeezing it wrong, you're holding it wrong, take off your gloves. It's like so many people are trying to get in there and they're wanting to experience that life of the river. And sometimes the community is not always super welcoming. And so to create an environment, and this is, again, what Ascent is about, is creating an environment in a community where people can come and the questions that they ask are the ones we've been waiting for someone to ask. So we're excited to answer. And so there's no dumb questions, and just that excitement of sharing something that we love and experiencing that together. So yeah, it's about empowering and educating people, but not as individuals. It's about bringing us together to share this resource, to appreciate this resource, and then hopefully ultimately to fight together to protect these resources. So it's a place of belonging, and our community is a place that's welcome for everyone. And I think that's really expressed in the way that our followers at Ascent and our community welcomes other people to join us.
Yeah, that's really great. And it's really great to have that kind of a positive influence in the sport. Folks that follow you may know this, maybe some don't, but you produce your flies overseas and you have 2 factories in Kenya. Can you tell us a little bit about your operation over there?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's probably a lot of misconceptions about where flies come from. And I'd say probably, 95% of commercially tied flies come from either Kenya, Sri Lanka, or Thailand. And commercial fly tying was brought to Kenya almost 100 years ago. So wherever the British colonized, they brought trout and they brought fly fishing. And they have a fly fishing club in Kenya. Last time I was there, I got an invitation to go up there, but I didn't have a chance. But it's like 150 years old. Like they've been doing it a long time. So yeah, fly tying. These are artisanal jobs. These are very sought after, well-paying jobs. And in 2014, my wife and I opened our first little fly tying factory about 2 hours from the Florian Mill factory where Orvis gets all their flies tied. And at that time, we had 2 fly tyers and a manager. And over the years, as we've grown, that has expanded into 40 full-time fly tyers now. And in a country with roughly 75% unemployment, when my family and I go to train and to spend time with our tyers, we've come to realize that those 40 tyers come with about 300 dependents. And so we have a young tyer who's 23. She's our youngest tyer. She's only been tying, I guess, about 4 years now. Most of our tyers have been tying 10 to 20 years. But she takes care of her 2 parents with her wages. Her sister, who's a widow, and her sister's 4 kids are being sent to school with fly tying wages. So there's a big responsibility, and this is a vital part of our community. And just as we desire to see life and success and hope experienced by our clients on the water, there's no success for Jessica and I and for the Ascent Fly Fishing family without making sure that our tyers and their families have a hope-filled and bright future as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned that family aspect. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that approach is different from what other folks do in the industry?
Yeah, so I haven't visited, factories in Thailand or Sri Lanka, but I've certainly seen enough factories in Kenya, and it's typically a very hand-to-mouth existence. So, while we would love to sell some TFO rods or some other stuff like that in the shop or some Sims waders, because we're not a traditional brick and mortar, they're not really open to that. And so instead of putting our money into building out infrastructure and kind of meeting the standard measures of success in the fly fishing industry, we invest in our people, and so we provide a living wage for the flies tied. On top of that, we give a profit share of a percentage of all sales, all purchases from the shop. And as we've grown, and we have grown exponentially every year, which has been such a blessing. But instead of upgrading the '03 Tacoma, we've been able to create a fund to cover health care for all of our tyers and their families that they're welcome to draw from whenever needed. And over time, maybe 10 cents a dozen, they will just pay that back as they tie flies. So these are interest-free kind of healthcare loans. And as our family has matured, our fly tying family has matured. We have kids going into university now, starting law school, and we're committed to seeing this trajectory, this life change for the community go through. So, helping to fund that and to keep orders going, even in the winter when we're not selling a lot of flies. This is what we're committed to.
Yeah, that's really great. And I think the amazing thing, and we were talking about this before we started recording, is, your flies are actually less expensive than most places that you can buy flies on the internet.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a high overhead to having traditional brick and mortar shops and, a number of people working in the shops and minimum orders with these larger big name brands. So, we stick to the flies and to the science. That's kind of our sweet spot. We supply all of our own materials. So we send over shipping containers full of hides and whiting hackles and hooks. And we don't have any middlemen. So to be able to sell professionally tied, 100% quality guaranteed flies for $1 to $1.25. I mean, that is sufficient to both care for our community as well as really open up the sport to more people, kind of take it away from just the 1%. And, I used to have these two boys that would ride their bikes over to my house with like $3 to $6 of allowance a week. And they'd buy 3 to 6 flies. And then we'd spend half an hour to 45 minutes looking at maps where their mom would drive them that weekend to fish. So, that's our community. And, it doesn't have to be overpriced stuff. It's, we get what we need, and it's touching a lot.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I know you'd mentioned the kids coming in your shop locally, but there are other things that you do that you have this exact same approach with your Colorado community as well.
We do. Yeah. So, we're part of a community here, and we met two boys along the Platte River near Littleton, Colorado. They were staying under a bridge on the Platte for several years. And we got to know them and hear their story. And it just made sense to, a lot of what we do is just kind of sitting down and relaxing and, packing some fly boxes. So we invited these first two boys that were living on the street over to the shop, and they started packing flies for us about 3 years ago. And as we got to spend time with them, we can talk about life and about skills and about what tomorrow can look like compared to today, and talk about budgeting. And as they, most of them have been able to move off the street and into housing and full-time employment. And then we invite someone else over, and it's just we have a need, we have an opportunity, and it's been a real blessing to get to know these guys. And if you look at them, you wouldn't think that they're fly fishermen, but they will heartily endorse their love for the fly fishing community. And as we've shared on Instagram and Facebook, the different successes that they are exhibiting, our community has piped in and been amazing. One of the last guys to get housing, his name was Matthew. I put out to the community that we might need some furniture, and we probably could have furnished 4 full houses within an hour just from the outpouring of support from our community. So I just feel so blessed to be among so many great people.
Yeah, that's really great. And, it's obvious from talking to you, and the community is a core value at Ascent. Where did you learn to value community so much, and why do you think it's so important?
I think in the day-to-day, it's pretty easy to be isolated and alone. And, I certainly, before I found the river and fly fishing, I had some pretty dark years of wondering what I was supposed to do and where I fit in. And I found a purpose and a passion, and I feel like fly fishing is kind of my medium to connect people with a place of healing and acceptance. The river doesn't belong to any one of us. You see people on Instagram blotting out the background of a river, or saying, "Oh, don't share that spot." That river's been around for millennia before, and people have fished it, and they will fish it after us. So, I want people to experience that sense of belonging, community. We all belong on the river. I find healing there. I find life there. I find hope there. And I want other people to experience that. And we're going to come back as better fathers and daughters and employees. And it's a great place to connect with your kids and to build new friendships and just to get some clarity. So, I always say, if you see the Ascent Fly Fishing truck next to the river, you're welcome to fish with me. And that is a sincere offer.
Yeah, that's really great. And can you speak a little bit, obviously, it's very important, but it's not perfect. Are there ways that community approach actually hinders what you're trying to accomplish?
We certainly do get some pushback periodically, because, different people approach the river and the sport of fly fishing, in very different ways. For some people, it's a competitive thing. It's an ownership thing. This is my spot. And we'll get some pushback, but that's not really my audience. That's not who I'm trying to reach. If they feel like they got all figured out on an island, that's all right. I certainly my time is a limited factor, So, here in the coming months, like it's generally, it can be 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. most nights. And so that can be exhausting. But I think what we need now is to find more people to join the Ascent Fly Fishing family, and people that kind of share this ethos and mission to share the river and empower people, people that can walk alongside me as we're trying to grow the sport.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And can you share maybe what you think the biggest misconception folks have about your approach?
Well, I think people are intimidated by the fly selections, by, you say science, and people go back to their physics or OChem from college, and their eyes roll back in their head, and they're like, I don't want to touch that. I barely passed it the first time. But again, I think it's not hard. It's just people need to have a spirit of inquisitiveness and some deductive reasoning, and be able to just observe and compare. If they can do those things, they can be eminently successful anglers. And so it's not hard. And I think if they give it a shot and try some of these approaches, they will have a better time on the water. They will catch more fish. And it's really approachable.
Got it. And how are you seeing this translate into new angler creation and retention?
From our inception, the people that have been with us have stayed with us, and we've never done any big marketing pushes or paid AdWords or other than having the opportunity to write for some magazines and speak at some shows, and so it's been largely word of mouth. Someone does this, they call or they come into the shop, and I look at their fly box and I send them away with out selling them any flies because they already had what they need. And I send them to a different river than they were going to go, and they catch 20 fish in an afternoon. They're going to tell their friends. And so those that have started with us have stayed with us, and those that and they've told other people. And so we're happy to be a place for people to land and gain some confidence in the sport.
Yeah, that's great. How are you seeing, kind of a similar question, how are you seeing your approach translate into a greater appreciation of the resource and an increased willingness of folks to actually speak for it and advocate on its behalf?
Right. Well, I think largely how we approach recreation or any pastime is we want to purchase experience. We want to purchase success. So I think the misconception is if you go in and you pay the extra money for the Winston rod and the Hatch reel, both awesome brands, great rods and reels, and you want to pay to have a fly guide on a retainer, that's going to make you successful. And they want the shortcut. They want the fast route to catching more fish. So my approach is more about slowing down and becoming part of the system, to seeing a world that's larger around you and starting to understand it. And as we gain an understanding of that, we begin to appreciate the relationships, the idiosyncrasies of season, of what's going on the edges of the river, and how that feeds the river and how the fish respond to that. And like anything, as we gain a deeper understanding to kind of its heartbeat, to its rhythm, there's a connection that forms there. And as you see, all of a sudden, not just I'm supposed to buy these flies to fish in this one hole to catch that fish, but we understand that, those bugs aren't working now because this is going on upstream and it's affecting this river now. And this place that had brought, a point of connection with my son is now not the same. So, forming that relationship with the water and the world of trout grows an appreciation and a desire to protect. I think it's going to build lifelong advocates for the river and people that are ambassadors for the sport of fly fishing.
Yeah, and as you've mentioned, earlier in the interview, community building is very labor intensive, and there's only one you and there's only one Ascent fly fishing. How do you scale this impact?
That's a good question, and I think we're looking for people that share the spirit, share this ethos, share this mission with us, that can walk alongside us and do this. We have some big plans and pushes for some mobile apps to kind of bring this community across the United States and empower people with this science. And it is labor intensive, but this is the work I want to do. I would rather spend time with people and see them experience life on the river than, make $1 million a year doing this. Yeah, I'm in it for the people and for helping them connect with the river.
That's great. And, as we're starting to wind down today, do you have any big plans or upcoming events you want to share with our listeners?
I think, we're going to be here in the Rockies for a little bit. I am talking with some clubs in Southern California about coming out and doing some intensives, streamside entomology seminars. I think I'm going to be heading down to Dallas here in the foreseeable future to also be doing a couple events. But we're going to be in the Rockies, and yeah, I'm easily accessible via my mobile, via email, through the contact page on the website. And yeah, we hope really to be able to assist your listeners in engaging the water and really getting what they want out of their experience on the river.
Yeah, that's great. And do you mind just sharing those specific details with our listeners? And I'll drop them in the show notes too.
Yeah, so our website is a wealth of knowledge and inexpensive quality tools and gear and flies, and that's Ascent Fly Fishing, ASCENT flyfishing.com. And then all of the podcasts and articles, everything's on there. And then our contact information, our email address, our phone number's on there as well. Following us on Instagram and Facebook is great because every time we're on the river, we're taking videos about what we're sampling, how we're doing it, what we're fishing. Based on how that bug is floating, we're going to be fishing this. Look how those bugs are flying, we're going to be fishing this. So that's really a great on the spot, in the moment medium where we can say, look at this, learn to observe this, and this means, how you should fish. And so they follow us on social media. It's a great way to really stay plugged in.
Well, that's great. Well, Peter, I really appreciate you taking some time to chat with me this morning.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I had a great time, and I hope your listeners were encouraged.
I'm sure they will be. Thanks again. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Please remember Peter's generous offer. Go to www.ascentflyfishing.com and use the code Articulate10. Remember, all caps, all one word, number 10 at checkout, and you'll get 10% off your order. And again, a shout out to this episode's sponsor, our friends at the Bristol Bay Defense Fund. Go to www.bristolbaydefensefund.com and donate today. Stay safe, everybody. Tight lines.